want to have a lesson this morning, and really the title to the lesson, when it comes up, some things to think about, a study of priorities, but it's really not the kind of lesson that you might think that it would be. We're going to look at some things that are pretty familiar to you, I'm sure, but the grouping might not be as familiar to you, because we're trying to look at things by way of contrast, by looking at either side of a question. So when we talk about priorities, we realize, of course, that our priorities have to be based upon something. And what I want to do this morning is I want to look at the ideas, the philosophies of life that are set forth by Satan and by Jesus Christ. And there are two statements that are, I think, very well expressed their philosophies and the things that dictate how their priorities would be established. You know, there are only, as far as I'm aware, two places that we have Satan speaking for himself. We find occasion to read of his conversation with Eve in the garden in Genesis chapter 3. And we find occasion for him, Satan, to have conversation with God concerning Job in Job's chapters 1 and chapter 2. In chapter 2 of the book of Job, we find that Satan sets forth what I believe pretty well sums up the philosophy that he has and that he believes that all people share with him. And many people do. In chapter 2, verse 1 through 4, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself therefore before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in all the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and hateth evil? Now this is the second time God had said this to Job. The first time he had said it to him, Satan asked for permission to test him, and he did, and he took away all of his physical possessions and his family. But Job did not falter. So God asked him the question a second time. And this time, Satan, I think, shells down the corn to what his belief really is. Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin. Yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Now, that really is a statement that pretty well describes the attitude that probably the majority of the people on the face of the earth have. That to them, their life is more important than anything else. And every decision that they make is made with that in mind. Now, if you stop and you think about that, you realize that there's also another side to the equation. And Jesus actually expresses the philosophy on the other side of the equation, which is the point that God was trying to prove to Satan and to us in the beginning. Jesus stated in Mark chapter 8 that there is something more important than life itself. Now, I realize that our country is based upon the principle of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But understand that our country is a physical kingdom of man. And consequently, the most valuable thing among men from a physical standpoint is their life. I mean, you can think about so many times when people have a fire and the house burns down, the trailer burns down, the apartment burns down, the office building burns down, whatever it is, and they're interviewed outside, and they'll say, well, you know what? That's terrible, but no one lost their life. When you see a tornado that goes through and just ravishes a community and no one dies, that's the first thing that's stated. Well, you know, we had a terrible situation here, but no one lost their life. Because that's how we view it from a physical viewpoint. But Jesus said something beyond that. In this particular passage, in verse 34, Jesus tells us, I looked at Matthew 8, I was wondering why I was having trouble reading what I wanted. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus, when he had called the people unto him with his disciples, also he said unto them, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Now, if you have a problem understanding exactly what he was talking about, he's talking about this principle of everything that a man hath, he'll give for his life. Whosoever will save his life shall lose it. Whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. And then he asked a question. What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world, lose his own soul? We have a song in our songbook that actually puts those words to music. What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Now you think about those two philosophies, and they are the philosophies that basically everyone lives by. Everyone lives by one of them. We either think that our physical life is the most important thing there is, or we think that our spiritual security is the most important thing there is. We will think one or the other. And our priorities in life will be established by which of those philosophies that we advance. Which is the most important to us? Is it our life? Or is it our eternal security? Now that's really what it boils down to. Well, here's the question. Why are there such differing ideas? I mean, why are the ideas of Satan and the ideas of Jesus so different? What is it that causes them to be so different? Well, one of those philosophies, that is Satan's, values temporary things. Temporary things. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19 through verse 23, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says this, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth where moth and rust doth corrupt and where thieves break through and steal. Now those would be the things that make up our life. All of them temporary. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The light, now here's where it comes to the matter of priorities. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, that is, it is very focused upon what is important and what's not, the whole body should be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, that is, it's not focused upon what is really important and what is not, thy whole body should be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, if you think about the statements that are made here, you understand the significance it has in relation to the two philosophies that are set forth by Satan, that everything a man has he'll give for his life, and the philosophy that's set forth by Jesus said, well, if you just save your life and lose your soul, you've lost it all. And you've made a terrible decision. Now, you look at this passage and you really see that it's a commentary on these two statements. These are two of the most important philosophical statements made anywhere because they describe human condition. And they describe basically every one of us. Everybody has to make a decision. We have to decide. Are we going to really be interested in things that are temporary? Because your life's temporary. Everything in it's temporary. Or are you going to be interested in the eternal place that you will reside? You know, there's only one thing. There's not one thing, a relationship that will survive eternally. Notice I said thing. Physical thing, maybe I should have put the word physical, no physical thing, no relationship will survive eternally. Not one. Now think about it for a moment. In Job chapter 1 and verse 21, when God had first begun to test Job and all the things of this life and all the people that he was related to had either been removed from him by death or by separation of philosophy, Job made a statement. Here's what he said. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, naked shall I return thither. Now you just think about that statement. The fact of the matter is that there is no thing that you accumulate in this life that will survive death with you, that you'll still possess. And there's no relationship. I mean, you think about it. What is the closest relationship that we have upon this earth? Jesus describes it as was described by God in the beginning, as being marriage, which is a one flesh relationship where two people are merged together so that they no longer are one entity, two entities, but one entity. And when I ask a question about that, trying to get him to make a statement concerning it in Matthew 22, Jesus said, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. In other words, what he said was, marriage is a temporary arrangement. We say, oh no, marriage is permanent. Oh no, marriage is a temporary arrangement because it is till death do us part. At some point, one or both of the two parties will die, and that relationship will no longer be the relationship they have. Now, so what you're saying is that it doesn't matter what you're describing. If you're thinking about this life, every single thing in it and every single relationship in it will be changed when this life ends. It is a temporary arrangement. Now let's think about that for a moment. What happens when we misunderstand that? When we don't get it? When we misunderstand it? When we don't really realize the temporary relationship of relationships of this life and the temporary possession of this life? What happens when we don't understand that? I want to go back to the Old Testament. Before we do, I want to say that what we really do is we end up wasting our time. I sometimes get a little aggravated at myself at the amount of time I waste. I realize that we need to have some recreation time and some time of just enjoying things, and I realize that, and I look into the Old and New Testaments, and I find that was true even then. But I also realize that sometimes we get so caught up that all we ever think about is what we can find enjoyable in life, and not so much how we can make preparation with it. And I think probably every person here has a problem with that sometimes. I'm not trying to accuse us all. I'm just saying we're all human beings. And it's very easy for us to get caught up. Now, I want to talk to you about a person who did get caught up, and that was Solomon. Solomon wrote a book, and one Sunday night a few years ago, I did something I've never done before or since. I did not have a sermon per se. We read the book of Ecclesiastes from beginning to end, every verse, 13 chapters. When I did that, I didn't really know how fast I could read in a public way. I wasn't sure how long it would last, but it lasted about 35 minutes, almost perfectly to what I normally do. But we just read it because it is a book that is so practical and so straightforward that while we do talk about it a great deal, most of the time when we're talking about we're making application of principle, we're not trying to describe and define the principles because they're pretty clear. They're pretty clear. 7 times, and it's kind of interesting in the Scriptures how many times you find this 7 come up. Over and over and over. It's the number of completion. And it seems amazing to me how many times it's there. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, 7 times, get yourself concordance, look it up. He uses the words vanity and vexation of spirit. Well, what I got to think about was this. How many of us really know what he's talking about? when he's talking about vanity and vexation of spirit. So what he's saying is, if you get so confused that you think this life is all there is, and this life is everything, and this life is where you need to put your emphasis, and this life needs to occupy all your time, you don't really need to think about anything other than that, which is what Satan says, then here's the problem. It's vanity and vexation of spirit, but the other problem is sometimes we don't know what that means. Well, if you don't know what the word vanity and vexation of spirit means, then I would suggest that we first read those 7 passages. There's 7 passages. I want to read them with you. In the first chapter, in verse 14, here's what he said. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun. And behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. And what he basically is saying, there will come a time that all the houses, bridges, skyscrapers, interstate highways, airports, whatever, will no longer exist. Now, in chapter 2 and verse 11, he says this, Then I looked at all the works of my hands, all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. There was no profit under the sun. He's talking about the life you built for yourself. And how hard you work to make yourself secure. And you have plenty to eat and a place to live. And you're comfortable in your retirement. And he talks about all those things and how they're so important. But he said this, I kind of realized that no matter how well I did at that, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, because I understand that one of these days, what will take control will be our last will and testament, and at that point we have nothing to do with it. Someone else does, an executor. And then in verse 17 he said, Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. You ever grow a garden? You grow a garden this year, and you're so pleased with it. But if you ever sit down to consider the fact that you're going to have to grow another next year, and it's going to be as hot and dusty as it was this year? And that's really what he's saying. I mean, you ever think about the fact that, if you think about cleaning house, and you go clean your house, and you're thinking all the time, you know what, by Friday it's going to be dirty again. And that's really what he's getting at. What he's getting at is that whatever we do in this life, if we just think about it strictly from the standpoint of that action, how fruitless it is. And then he goes on down to verse 26, and he says this, For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight, and wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail, together and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. Because here's the problem. People are always talking about, life's not fair. Some people prosper and they have so much, and then they're going to die, and these other people don't have much. But what God says is, remember one thing. Just go back and read the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and you'll understand the principle he's stating. Then in the final analysis, this guy who's just had everything, what difference is there when he dies? I think last week we kind of had a lesson which I mentioned, may have been Sunday evening, that in the final analysis, no matter how big your house is, you're finally going to occupy a space that is approximately 4 feet by 6 feet. That's the space you'll occupy. Whoever you are and however much you have. That's it. And that's really what he's getting at. He's saying, it really, when I look at all that, it's vanity and vexation of spirit. And then you skip over to chapter 4 and verse 4, and he said this, Again, I considered all travail and every right work. For this a man is envied of his neighbor. Just think of it. Just think about all the things you do and all the attention you give to it. I think about a fellow is still living, and if you ever go out to the dump, you might have met him. His name is Shorty. And old Shorty has a nice little lot in town, he and his wife, who I believe has now passed away, and he's almost 90, still working out there. Just have something to do, I guess. But how many times I rode by his yard, and I would see that he had won the Yard of the Month award. And all the work that he put into that to win that Yard of the Month award. But just think about what he's saying. He's saying, you know, you're putting forth all this effort, and you're so concerned. And you sit down. I mean, I think about all the things I've done in house building. You sit down and you spend so much time in all the detail of designing cabinets and this, that, and the other. But in the final analysis, all those things are temporary. And all the worry and the fret that you give to them, I mean, I know that they bring us some joy, but still, if you just stop and think, really, what is the long-term effect? And that's really the point that he's making. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. In verse 16, same chapter. There is no end of all the people, even of all them that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. Do you know, I have a first cousin. His name is James. And if he's still living, hadn't seen him in several years, I'm not sure. Don't really keep in touch much with that side of the family at all. But lived in Huntsville. Just stumbled into a church one Sunday, a church building, to a worship service there. And he happened to be there. Didn't know he even, wasn't thinking about him. He heard my name. When I introduced myself, told me who he was. He's my first cousin. Invited me over to his house, and Pat and I and the kids. And we ate lunch, and he had all this stuff that he had done tracing our ancestry, and went back as far as he could go back into the 1600s in England, which really shocked me. I always thought I was Scotch-Irish. I'm not. I'm English. But anyway, he gets all this stuff together. And then I get to thinking about my children, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the things they're going to do. But he said, you know, really, which part of all that spectrum is important to me? All those people in the past, all those people in the future. Which part of that's important to me? You know which part is? Today. Really none of it. I have nothing to do with it. And so he said, you know, you have to kind of understand that. That's also vanity and vexation of spirit. And then he goes over the last reference in chapter 6 and verse 9. He said this, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. Boy, you're talking about something that really hit you right between the eyes. What you have is better than all the things that you might think you might like to have. But he said, really, that's where people are. People are always trying to get to a better place. Just think in our country of the words that are used commonly about a person's house that they buy when they're a young person. You know what the word that's usually used is? Starter house. What's that mean? That means we're going to improve it. We're going to go up. We're going to get something better and better and better and better. But he asked the question, which one can you enjoy? The one you have or the one that you're desiring to have at some point in the future? He said this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. All this that we get so concerned about because, you know, there's a lot of things that happen may not ever possess them. Well, what he's saying is if we misunderstand what is really important in life and we kind of buy into Satan's line that all that a man has he'll give in exchange for his life, and this life is the only thing that's important, that's vanity and vexation of spirit. And if we misunderstand that, we're going to have a serious problem. Now, I took the time to do something I've not done before, as far as I know. I looked up the definition of the phrase, vanity of vexation of spirit, and it kind of surprised me. I was looking for something that was not what I was given. Do you know what the word vanity literally is translated from? It literally is the word breath. That's what it is. It's the word breath. The word vanity and the word breath in the original language in which the book was written, in Hebrew, is the same word. And then I saw a reference as to why it is given the same, that word is chosen and used to what Job said in Job 7 and verse 15. So that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than life. He's talking about breath. I loathe it. I would not live always. How many people do you know get in a really bad condition and they tell you, you know what? I really don't want to live anymore. I really don't. And that's what Job is saying. I'm in such a position that I hate it. I just wish my breath would leave. I view breath as a vanity. I mean, what is it doing? Every day I continue to breathe, I'm able to sit around with all these sores and take this broken pieces of pottery and scratch it and try to get some relief. That's what my life has come to. Why would I even want to be a part of that, is what Job is saying. I mean, people you know like that. Really, a lot of us. A lot of folks in this world, they begin to get to the point, they kind of consider life to be useless and purposeless, and they don't really see any point to it. It just kind of surprised me. For my days, he said, are vanity. The word vanity is breath. The same word. I mean, you ever thought about a person who's in the hospital and they've had a serious accident and they put them on a ventilator and they come to you and they ask you the question, do you want to continue to have them on the ventilator? And you know what the most commonly used words in describing that? I don't see the purpose. I think it's useless. That's the most commonly used words to describe it. That's why he uses the word breath. Is there more to life than just breathing? That's really what Job was saying. There's more to life than just breathing. Now, what Jesus is trying to tell you is what really adds value to life. It's the concern you have for the soul. And when you think of the word vanity and vexation of spirit, I got to thinking about that word, and you know what's interesting? If you turn it into a word search, vexation of spirit, what you find is the word vexation is really not even there. That it's an extension of the definition of the word vanity is what it is. Why would you think it would be? Think of the word vexation. What do you think of the word vexation? You ever seen a cat kill a mouse? You ever just watched them? Well, if you did, you get a pretty good indication of what vexation is. You know, a cat, you think an old cat's like a hunter, goes out in the woods, finds him one, and you draw a bead on him, try to hit him in the most vulnerable place and kill him instantly. Cat doesn't do that at all. That's not his interest. Cat gets a little mouse down there, and he swats him around a little bit and bites him a few times, and then he just turns him loose. And he takes off running. And the old cat sticks his paw out and grabs him and pulls him back. And he might do that 50, 100 times. You think about the vexation of spirit that poor old mouse is experiencing, and you realize that that's what he's saying about your life. Your life's kind of like, you're kind of like a little mouse. All these problems arise, and you think, well, I can just accomplish, this is all part of life, and life's the most important thing, and I'm going to solve it with that in mind. And every time you get snatched back to reality. That that's not the most important thing in life. Life is not the most important thing in life. Jesus said, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Now, I chose a rather strange passage, I guess, and I think this is one that I'm going to have to offer you an explanation of. Vexation of spirit signifies frustration that comes from trying to catch the wind. You know, it's an expression that's used, trying to catch the wind, and how horrible it is and how difficult it is to do that. And of course, the answer is you can't. I remember several years ago, many, many years ago now, hearing a preacher preach in Valdosta, Georgia. And during his preaching, he was one that liked to use props in his preaching. And he had sitting up on the pulpit when he started preaching a quart fruit jar with a lid on it. And kind of caught your attention as he was preaching. And as he got during the lesson, he was talking about this idea of striving after the wind. And he finally picked up that fruit jar and he said, now, I went out in the yard before I started and I held it up and the wind blew in it and I capped it off and I put the lid on. You know what happens when you open it? Try it. What happens? Nothing. Not one single thing. You know, you'd think, hey, I caught the wind, it's going to come rushing back out just the way it went in. Does not happen. Nothing happens. You open the lid and nothing happens. You look at it, there's nothing in it. You open the lid and you feel of it and nothing happens. That's why when you look at this word vexation of spirit, it's a frustrating thing, and it's what a lot of people are doing. A lot of people are thinking that, hey, this life is the answer. Hosea chapter 12, God is talking about Israel, and He's using the word Ephraim, which was one of the tribes of Israel, as really to represent the whole country. And He said this, Ephraim feedeth on the wind. Now He mentions specifically, and followeth the east wind. Now the reason He mentions that is because in that part of the country, best I can understand, the only thing that came from the east was hot, dry air that was a real problem. Rain and things that were good never happened when it came from the east. Had to look for that west wind for that to be accomplished. And He said, Ephraim followeth after the east wind. Well, what's he doing? He daily increaseth lies and desolation. Well, how's he doing that? They do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried to Egypt. What God is saying is they're trying to look to the Assyrians for their deliverance. You know who destroyed the nation of Israel and captured the city of Samaria? It was the Assyrians. He said they carry oil to Egypt, meaning they're going down trying to hire some people to come back and assist us. What do you normally call the nation of Israel today? I'm not talking about Israel in the sense of that nation that's there. I'm talking about if you look at Judah and Israel, those two separate kingdoms, during the time of the divided kingdom, and you talk about Israel, what is the most commonly used expression? The 10 lost tribes of Israel. They cease to exist. Now you think of what He's saying. They tried everything they could from a material, earthly, physical, fleshly position. And what happened? They failed. How could they have succeeded? Turn to God. That's really the point He's making. That's the point we need to understand. Now this lesson is going to come to a quick end. You probably are thankful for that. What is the answer to this dilemma? I mean, what is the answer? You think about it. What are your priorities going to be established on? You're going to say, well, this life is the most important thing I have. This physical life, the most important thing I have. And every decision I make is going to be made in relationship to it. Or are you going to decide, well, you know what? This is all temporary and everything in it's temporary. And there's nothing in it that's permanent, period, except for one thing, and that's the fact I have a soul. And every decision I make, I'm going to make it in regard to that soul that I possess, and not this life that I really don't possess at all. You don't possess this life. It's not yours. You have it on loan. A soul is yours. That's yours. It belongs to you. Whatever disposition you want to make with a soul, you can make it. God won't stop you. Your life, that's a different story. So what's the answer to the dilemma? Which side are you going to come down on? Well, I'm going to quote to you one of the most commonly quoted passages. Only one solution. We must change our value system if we ever expect to change our priorities. Solomon, when he had this lesson on things being vanity and vexation of spirit, finally reached a conclusion. Spent a lifetime trying to find the answer. Looked into everything that life had to offer and finally said this. You're all familiar with it. Nothing new. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. I hope you gained a little bit from this lesson this morning. I know that there's no new thing under the sun, but I try to approach it in a little bit different way to make an impression on us. I mean, life is something you have on loan. A soul is a permanent possession. The only one you have. You only have one permanent possession, and that's your soul. So every decision you make needs to be made in regard to that permanent possession, not those temporary things that relate to this life. You know, I know we often in offering the invitation talk about Acts 2 and 38, but let me tell you something. You ought to go back and examine it sometimes. When those people obeyed the gospel, when he said, men and brethren, what should we do? When they said, men and brethren, what should we do? And he said, repent and be baptized, and they did that, and 3,000 obeyed the gospel that day. Beginning in the next chapter is the consequence of that decision related to this life. And it was not pleasant. But then you can look on to the 7th chapter. When Stephen is being stoned to death, you see why. Because he's standing there, and he looks up, and he sees Jesus standing there. And he realizes, I made a good decision. My soul is more important than my life. Think about it as together we stand as we sing.